السلام عليكم أصدقائي، تحياتي، مرحبا فيكم في حلقة جديدة. اللقاء اليوم حيكون نوعا ما مختلف. أنا متواجد في مكتب أمان سوليسيترز في منطقة ويمبلي شمال غرب لندن. الشركة أو المكتب المحاماة متخصص بأمور الهجرة وأمور أخرى في زوايا مختلفة. بصحبة اليوم الأستاذ بشارات علي. السلام عليكم.
وعليكم السلام ورحمة الله وبركاته.
هو أحد المحامين وأحد المدراء التنفيذيين في هاي الشركة. بدنا نطرح عليه بعض الأسئلة. Let's start.
بسم الله.
So one of the main questions is what's going to change after the 31st of December in terms of laws and rules related to refugees mainly?
The answer is at the moment we don't know, because for that to happen, the government will have to either opt out of the 1951 UN Convention relating to the status of refugees, which is the governing international instrument for refugee law in the West, and the 1950 UN Convention, the European Union's Convention on Human Rights. So at the moment, that would require major changes to the law. Priti Patel announced at the Conservative Party conference that she intends to overhaul the asylum system, the biggest overhaul in decades. So on current track records, I wouldn't be surprised if the government does make major changes. But at the moment, the rules are what they are, so we don't know what they will do.
So we've heard a number of statements from officials from the Home Office that refugees might be detained or kept in floating abandoned ships or be sent to remote British islands. Is this going to materialize? Is there rejection from any other party, human rights organizations? Do you think it's accessible?
Well, these noises were made in the wake of the former Australian Prime Minister advising the British government about various matters. So I'm not saying he raised it, but Australia, as you very well know, has outsourced from the mainland of Australia certain categories of asylum seekers. And the British government has made noises about using Ascension Island and St Helena, which are about 4,000 miles from here, but we don't think that's likely to happen. The likelihood of using ships moored off the coast is possible because they're cheap and temporary and can be sold on. The likelihood of further detention centres being built is also possible. So given the increasing anti-migrant, anti-refugee rhetoric that is coming out from the government, and past governments were no different. The Labour government wasn't much different when it came to immigrants, so I'm not taking sides here. There's been a hostile environment towards refugees for decades, unfortunately.
Will the refugee issue stop totally in the UK after the total Brexit? Will the applications be automatically refused? I mean, people are worried if they are coming here, if they will be sent back. Can people still apply for refugees and asylum seeker?
Okay, there are a number of questions, so let's take each of them in order. The law at the moment is that if you come from a European country, absent very limited exceptions, you should be sent back, and at the moment there is cooperation in Europe in the form of the Dublin regulations, which requires states to accept people being sent back. If there is no agreement between the European Union and the United Kingdom by the 31st of December 2020, then unless the European Union agrees to accept people, then the British government will have to negotiate an arrangement with every country, or they will not be able to send them back. We don't know is the answer.
Right.
Second part is, anybody arriving at the moment, they can apply for asylum, but if they see you coming from France in dinghies, they're legally entitled to send you back, unless you can justify some sort of exceptional basis for not being sent back.
But will France accept them?
That's a matter for the French government, but Mr. Macron and his ministers are not particularly keen, because to be very frank with you, indirectly they're nodding people through. That's what the British government says all the time. So it's a matter for the French government what position they take, and it's going to be a matter of negotiations between either the European Union and the United Kingdom. I can't see how France could unilaterally negotiate something with the EU territory.
Also, there was a suggestion and idea to set up a net on that English channel. I mean, is this really going to be welcomed in the UK as a country that supports the human rights and refugees?
Well, the answer is that if you don't want refugees coming here, there are three simple points. Don't support tyrannical regimes in the Middle East, whether it's the Egyptians, the Saudis, or the Israelis, or elsewhere. Don't help them steal the wealth of the people, so people are coming for economic reasons if they're not coming for political reasons. and don't bomb these countries into the Stone Age or arm governments such as the Saudis when they are destroying Yemen or wherever. So the net is a cheap political gimmick. If they try using it, there's going to be serious risk to people's life and health, and that may well be challenged, because you cannot start to drown people if that's what may happen.
Yeah.
So it would seem like a political statement, but to be honest with you, we will see, but it will certainly be very legally challengeable, I would imagine.
What will happen to European passport holders who have been in the UK for 5 years, and those who just moved in, and those who are planning to come and live after the 31st of December? Will new European passport holders be entitled to any type of benefit, or they have to start working for 6 months before they start claiming?
Okay, again, those that have lived here, let's deal with those, they can apply under the EU settlement scheme. So there's a process, there's a portal, and many are doing it. With regard to those who arrive before the 31st of December this year, 11 p.m. in the evening, they will be able to apply, and there will be some arrangements made for them. The exact shape of what will happen for those who come after, we don't know, because again, it's subject to what is negotiated between the European Union and the United Kingdom. Now, generally, the free movement of people is for work or for studying and things like that. So people should aim to work. And in terms of benefit regimes going forward, again, once we're no longer a part of the EU, we've already left. So there's a misunderstanding. The UK has left the European Union. We're in the transition phase, which finishes on the 31st of December at 11 p.m. So we're no longer a part of the European Union. The laws that now apply are what are called transitional provisions, i.e. until this period is over, we will continue to apply the same laws.
So if a European passport holder arrives today,
they can still apply. They can still apply to regularize their status in the United Kingdom, yes.
Will he or she receive benefits, or they have to work first?
Well, the rule with benefits is that you should be looking to work, and if you apply for benefits, then you will be challenged, because part of the reason here is that benefits are there as a last resort. You shouldn't come here for benefits. And then depending on because I'm not a benefits expert, but depending on which benefits you go for, there are rules about benefits as well.
Tell us please about the latest updates regarding spouse visa and its conditions, whether for refugees or those with work visa. Is there like really main clear conditions? Somebody has to work certain amount of hours to receive certain amount of income? Okay.
With regard to spouse visas, refugee family reunion is separate and spouse is separate. So if you are settled in this country or a British citizen, you can sponsor your spouse to come and join you. The requirement at the moment is £18,600 per annum income.
After tax?
No, before tax. And there are many ways you can meet it. There are a whole host. The easiest way is if you're working, pay slips, bank statements, letter of confirmation from your employer, and you can just confirm, show by way of documents that you are receiving this income. The income threshold is satisfied. If you have children, then it's a graded system which rises up. Now, the rules on that are very flexible. Since COVID, there have been relaxations in the rules, which if you've been affected by COVID because you were laid off or furloughed or whatever, then there's flexibility in the system, which is welcome. I'm not going to say it's all doom and gloom. Where the government does something good, we'll recognize that. So there was a lot of flexibility even about switching into this category from other categories, but that's all gone now. So I think the rules are still what they were, but there's some flexibility which helps people affected by COVID.
So will the family reunification includes extended members of the family like father, brother, sister, or is it only wife and children under the age of 16?
Okay. The family reunion provision under the Refugee Convention. So if you've got refugee status, your pre-flight, i.e. before you left your country of origin or where you were living, if you were out of your country of origin, if you were married and you had children, they're automatically covered so long as the children are still under the age of 18 and they're not living an independent existence, because some cultures children get married at 16, 17. Even in this country, if you go to Scotland, you can marry at the age of 16 as well with permission from a spouse. In this country, you can get married in the United Kingdom, with permission. So the point here is that those provisions are still the same, so long as you're with the household. Now, extended family members is tricky. General rule is they don't come in. You have to justify why they should come in. So, for example, let's take an example. If you're a Syrian family living in Turkey, for example. Now, I recently did a case not too long ago in court where the refugee's mother, she was a grandmother, I think, sorry. She was very elderly, and he had fled, came to the UK, become a refugee. His wife was living, so his mother, very elderly mother, was living in Turkey. The lady doesn't speak any Turkish. She is very elderly, not well. She was refused. The wife and children were granted visas on family reunion because it was clearly established that they were a family unit before leaving Syria. We went to court, and alhamdulillah, we won that case. Adult dependent relative criteria, the judge accepted it. But it's very difficult. Whereas if you've got young children, say they're your nieces and nephews, if you're from Aleppo or somewhere and the parents were killed, then if they were dependent, you will be able to get them in. Everything is fact sensitive, but the more compelling the circumstances, the easier it will be. Once they get over 18, and the more difficult it is.
Right. Is there a lag currently in processing the applications concerning visas, screen interviews for migrants or refugees, or interviews or fingerprinting, naturalization applications?
Okay. Because of COVID, everything has been affected. Yes. The short answer is all of those categories that you mentioned have been affected. But the government have recently introduced an app which allows people to provide their details and upload documents using a phone. So the government is taking steps, and again, they're welcome. Wherever anything is being done which is positive, we'll always say thank you very much, because what makes it easier for us and our clients, we're not going to say no to. So that's a positive step. But clearly, there's been very lengthy delays, especially in asylum cases. Very few decisions have been made over the last 6 months. Although there's talk about privatizing the asylum interviewing process in the next few months. I'm not sure about how good that or bad that might be.
If someone has a family in the UK and they have citizenship or permanent residency, and he comes from abroad and applies for asylum, what are the chances he be accepted? Because they might say you applied because you have a family, for example. Or can a brother or a parent be brought on a family reunification?
Okay, two separate questions. An asylum case is individual specific, generally. So unless, for example, that person is part of a tribe or a family who are targeted directly, and the whole of that. So example will be, we did the leading Syrian case where every Syrian is a refugee unless they can be shown to be Hizb al-Ba'ath Assad supporters. Okay. Our firm did that. It's the leading reference point. Now here, most Syrians, whether you have a family member or not, you will be granted it. But just having a family member who's British settled here doesn't help your refugee status claim at all, unless there's something about their history. So if the brother said, I was a member of this group, I was persecuted, and my family were persecuted, my brother is now in prison or something, and then they turn up, the fact that the brother was successful will be positive, but it doesn't determine the outcome. Every refugee case has to be proved. With regard to bringing other relatives, not on refugee, but if you're settled here and you've got an elderly, what's called an adult dependent relative.
Visit. Yeah, they can visit.
Well, visiting is separate, but you can also apply for settlement, but the legal requirements are very tough. But visit visas, of course, temporary coming and going, as long as you meet the requirements, you can apply for them. Many of them are refused, but many do succeed.
Just a catch-up question to previous questions. So the chances of people being accepted on asylum seeker applications, if they come through the English channel, obviously they come legally, and if somebody uses a fake passport, they come through the airport. Is there like difference between which route you're coming, which route might be accepted, which route might be accepted?
Well, the answer is very straightforward. If you can't apply for asylum from outside the United Kingdom anyway, so of a necessity, most people enter the country illegally, and that's not unlawful. If you enter as a refugee, if you use false documents, that's a criminal offence, and if you don't become a refugee, then you can be prosecuted. So if you said I'm a refugee and they find out that you were a businessman, in upmarket Cairo or upmarket Islamabad, I'm not necessarily any country, and you get found out, then you will be prosecuted, and generally people go to prison for using false documents. It's quite a serious criminal offence. But if you are recognised as a refugee, then but should not
It's
prosecute.
the only way that you can.
Because there's no other way of coming here,
Yeah.
and if your life is in danger, you're not going to be worried about how you get out of wherever you are for safety. So, if you come across a channel and they see you in the channel, they'll say, clearly you come from France, go back.
Mm.
If you land at the airport and you say you came from France, they can send you back again.
Mm-hmm.
But if you land at the airport having flown from a non-European Union country, non-safe country, then they usually will not send you back.
Will there be a legacy case to grant those who are waiting for years to get their application accepted, because there are so many people are on the run now?
The answer is they always say no, but in the time I've been practicing this area of law over the last 20 odd years, there have been, I think, from memory, at least two, if not three schemes. Two schemes for sure.
So each 7-8 years.
Yani, the way this works is that it's a political decision.
Ah.
Because unless you invest huge amounts of money in trying to process cases on a fact-sensitive basis, interviewing people, assessing their cases, you can't really fairly determine them. So the governments make political decisions. They will say, well, whoever came here from up to this date and claimed asylum, we will consider them. They won't call it a legacy, because what happens, loads of other people try and come in.
Yeah.
So politically, if it is announced, it may not be a bad idea, but I don't think the current government has the appetite. When they've been so hostile on immigration, it would look foolish.
What is considered a good or bad character in terms of affecting the decision to be granted British citizenship?
Okay, good or bad character is often confused with criminal records or criminal convictions. Completely different. The concept of having a good character, anything you do could be taken against you. So take the case of Muhammad al-Fayyad, who was the owner of Harrods. It's the leading legal authority which deals with this issue. Good character is anything about your conduct which would question your fitness to be a British citizen. So it's not about criminal conduct, it's not about laws being broken. It could be anything. Muhammad al-Fayyad did not get convicted of a criminal offence. He was denied, his brother eventually got it, but he did not get British citizenship.
Why?
Because they all linked. There was a guy called Tiny Rowland, he was a businessman, they were competitors, and it all centres around, from what I remember correctly, was the safe deposit box that he had in Harrods. Muhammad al-Fayyad owned Harrods.
Okay.
So it is messy, but the simple point is, if you've made statements or comments which are, in the judgment of the Home Secretary, of such a nature that you're of bad character. So typically, let me give you a few examples of bad character. So you could have said horrible things about politicians, possibly, nasty things. You could have said horrible, nasty things about members of the royal family.
Is this not considered freedom of expression?
Well, the argument is that it could be, but that's what I'm saying, it's an issue of judgment. So if you committed criminal offences, that's bad character. If you've lied on the application form, all of these things can be used against you. So if you are, for example, support, I don't know, Putin, you say, I'm a Marxist, I support Xi Jinping. Now, you could say that's political freedom. The government will say, well, actually, we think that's bad character. Or you support, I don't know, Daesh, or you support, for example, some dictatorship somewhere, or some tyrant. So there are many examples you could bring of what is bad character. You could have been part of Hizb al-Ba'ath in Iraq. But, you know, I've had cases, we've got a case I'm dealing at the moment, where somebody's, now he was just a scientist, for example, or he could have been an engineer, could have been an accountant. You know, if you were not at the top level of Hizb al-Ba'ath, because in Iraq, there were, I think, 2 million members or something. But the government has used many of these as an example to say, well, you were a member of the Ba'ath Party, therefore you and Saddam Hussein are the same. Well, not necessarily.
What?
Well, not necessarily.
If somebody was granted permanent residency, indefinite leave to remain, is there any way that it can be revoked or never?
Yes, of course. Indefinite leave to remain can be revoked if you got it by fraud. So if you lied, people, for example, came here, said, I'm Kuwaiti Bidun, and they were from Jordan or Iraq or Palestine, and they find that out, which does happen sometimes, or somebody came and said, I'm from Kosovo, but actually they're Albanian because they're the same language, or they said, I'm Afghani, but they're Pashtun from Pakistan, for example, and that gets found out, it has happened for some people, then they can revoke. because anything gained by deception is like you never gained it. So it can be revoked if you commit a criminal offence, which
serious offence.
If you get 12 months or more in prison, automatic deportation provisions apply. So therefore, indefinite leave to remain can be revoked or cancelled. Citizenship can't be once you've got it. If you acquired it properly, then, well, it can now. If you're, for example,
terrorists and stuff.
The allegations of terrorism, like that Shabina Begum case, that girl from East London, and who ended up in, I think Jack Letts. Well, I'm not sure if he has had his citizenship revoked as well. The dual national Canadian British guy. So, if you're a dual national and you've done national security threatening actions or terrorism and things of that nature, then you could be stripped of your citizenship as well. Actually, so there's 2 tiers of citizenship now.
Right. So, in terms of fears of expressing your opinion, if somebody posts something on Facebook, this is considered freedom of expression. But will there be anything that somebody posts on Facebook, like criticizing the government in any way, not inciting but criticizing? Will that be taken against them?
Incitement, yes. Criticism, no. So if you are criticizing, saying, well, Boris Johnson, that policy is terrible, you're a rubbish Prime Minister, that can't be used against you. But if you say, let's smash down the doors of Downing Street or something, that's incitement to criminal offences. So anything of that nature, if you're a British citizen, you could be prosecuted potentially for offences where you incite criminal conduct. But if you just, without any criminal
cause
harm or anything of that nature, you comment on politics, then of course at the moment you can't be prosecuted for that, and you can't be denied on the basis of bad character, or they shouldn't be.
What is the fate of those who abandon their home of residence while they are waiting for the application to be processed and they are on the run? They might fear for being deported. I mean, is it a good thing or bad thing to leave the place where they were hosted?
Well, look, if you are subject to a bail and you agree to abide by conditions of residence, then you shouldn't abscond. Now, that's easy for me to say as a lawyer. If you are one of those unfortunate people who lost their case but genuinely fear being persecuted, and you go on the run, then that's a choice you make. If you get caught, they will try and remove you, because unless you can show the decision to refuse you refugee status or whatever you applied for was unlawful, which you can only do through making a fresh claim for asylum or further representations, then if you're caught, the government will eventually remove you or seek to remove you. Whether they detain you to remove you or not, that's a different question.
And those who on the run before they receive any answer about their application, so that they might lose instead of gaining?
Well, yes, of course, because if you made an application, you should stay in touch with your solicitor if you have a solicitor representing you. If not, you should notify the Home Office of change of address, because the duty is upon you to keep them updated of where you are, because if they're going to communicate a decision, if they're going to invite you for an interview, ask you for further information, they can't do that if you're not living where you said you were living. So it's useful to have a lawyer or solicitor representing you, because that way the Home Office will hopefully communicate with them, but you should not go underground. That is not recommended. And it's not lawful either.
And those who have their applications refused in the past, can they make a fresh claim? Are they going to be connected in some way or another?
Absolutely. So let's take an example. If you fled your country of origin, you lost your case. Take a Palestinian from one of the refugee camps in Lebanon, for example, whether Ain al-Hilwi or Rashidi or whatever, and they fled and they lost, and then there's been a change in circumstance, you can make a fresh claim. But if you just said the same thing you said before and the judge said, I think you're a liar, that's going to have zero prospects of success. But the situation, for example, in Lebanon has changed horrendously in the last 2 years. For anybody in Lebanon, not just Palestinians. Obviously, Palestinians in Lebanon have a lesser status than other citizens. So if you or your family have been affected by that, secondly, if you've taken part in political demonstrations, political rallies in the United Kingdom, calling for the downfall of the regime in the country you're from, and you can show that, most countries monitor what happens outside their embassies. They film it very often. They have informants in the community. They have intelligence. Now, those sort of cases, I remember the leading case on Iran, BA Iran, which I did, it turned on surveillance of people outside, for example, the Iranian embassy. We succeeded in that case. But obviously you have to prove that you individually, because of your profile, your characteristics, would be at risk on return to your country. So you can make a fresh claim. It needs to be prepared well. It's not enough just to fill in a form and say, don't send me back, I'm going to get killed. I mean, it's dramatic, but it's quite frankly rubbish. If a judge previously, when you went to court, said, I've listened to you, I've looked at your documents, I think you're a liar, I don't believe a word of what you say, or I think, you might have had a problem with Fatah in the refugee camp, but you know what, if you're linked to Hamas or you're linked to somebody else, it's not enough because this is the norm in the Palestinian refugee camps in, for example, Lebanon, then you're not going to succeed unless you can bring reliable, credible and cogent evidence which shows that there's been what's called a change of circumstance, which is material to the risk to you on return, in which case, yes, you can make a good fresh claim.
If you give us the statistics about the number of refugees coming to the UK each year, or those who are waiting for their applications to be processed?
Okay, many thousands. It used to be at the peak, many high tens of thousands of refugees used to come. The United Kingdom has not got the largest number of refugee claims in this country. Germany has far more. So because of COVID, the delays now are many tens of thousands, understandably, because many thousands are applying every month. The previous thousands that applied are not getting decisions. So I don't have the exact statistics to hand, but the backlog is many tens of thousands for sure. And what the Home Office are now doing is, recently I inquired about a client of mine, and they said, well, we're dealing with the older cases first, and we're not going to look at your client's case, even though he has quite a compelling case on the facts. So the numbers are going up every day, every week, because unless you start making decisions, all you're doing is registering cases. It's like taking orders for food, but not delivering it, and then your order list becomes huge, and unless you expand your workforce, you can't cope with it. So unfortunately, the delays are very long.
One of the sentences being repeated in the refusal letters when somebody applies for visit visa, is that they fear that this person will go to the UK and might not come back to his country of residence, original place. So why, like, more than 50% of the applications being refused? I mean, despite the fact all documents are submitted.
There is a mindset problem here. So depending on which part of the world you apply in, the refusal rates are higher for Africa, for Bangladesh, Pakistan, for example, places like that. And it's unfortunately a mindset problem that certain categories of people are going to be dishonest or not go back. Legally speaking, you need to prepare an application thoroughly. I'll be honest with you, blame lies on both parts. Many people want to take shortcuts, save money, do it themselves. Now, if you happen to be a wealthy Kuwaiti, you won't have a problem because no Kuwaiti would want to live here, because KD is what, 3 to the pound.
Yeah.
Now, if you happen to be coming from, say, I don't know, Palestine or Pakistan or Bangladesh or Nigeria, which are countries relatively speaking are poorer, or Egypt, the mindset will be it's wrong. You won't go back. Now, you should make sure that all the documents that are required are properly checked and prepared. I've seen horrendous applications which are inviting refusals because the law says you must prove to us you're a genuine visitor, you've got the money, you will come here, you will leave the country, you will go back to your country of origin.
Okay.
Now, evidentially, that requires work to be done. A lot of the times people don't want to do it, or don't want to pay for it to be done, or choose incompetent people to do it for them. I can't criticize the refusal if you haven't provided the evidence. But even when we provided the evidence, I can tell you that many cases still refused, because very often the officers looking at the cases have got are prejudging it, or are looking at the ethnic origin as a factor, not the only factor, because you can't really think of any other explanation.
Is it true that there is quotation for each country each year to accept certain number of applications?
I don't think there's quotas. I'm not aware of any quotas, but the evidence, as I've said, it seems to me that certain countries have a higher refusal rate than others, and that's not to say people from those countries don't abuse the system. Many people do come as visitors and don't go back, but as a government, that does not allow you to judge everybody based upon some people not obeying the law. if the evidence is, the bank statements are there, the invitation is there, all of the key documents are there, then you should grant that visa. And if you've applied properly, I mean, visit visa appeals, just to give you statistics, I think between 70 to 80% of them used to succeed before they abolished the right of appeal. Then you can only do judicial reviews now, which is more of a fiqhi issue. You can't challenge the conclusion, you can only challenge how did they make the decision, and the best result you can get from the upper tribunal, which is where you go for a judicial review, is the decision is wrong, remake it. So if you properly prepared the case, explained everything properly, is refused, you have a good chance of succeeding in challenging it in the court.
Most of the refugees who are coming to the UK, they don't know how to start the process of finding a solicitor or a lawyer. They're giving a list, they are stuck, they don't know what to do. So what's the step-by-step process if somebody doesn't understand English to find a solicitor, and the costs and etc., and if somebody is interested to come to your office, do you welcome them?
Yeah, the last part, of course, everybody's welcome to come to our office. What you have to do is, if you are a stranger to this country, you need to ask. As a general rule, if you qualify for, on the basis of you haven't got income or assets in the last month, then most people are entitled to publicly funded advice. Legal aid is called. Communication is absolutely essential. So you should contact, if you go direct to a firm and they can arrange a good interpreter for you, which will be funded on the legal aid payment scheme, then it's important. The interpreters that we work with or the clients bring to us generally are very good, if not excellent. It's important because they must speak English fluently, they must speak Arabic fluently, or Urdu or Punjabi, whatever language you speak, because the details in the history of the case, I can tell you cases have lost because of one word.
Oh, wow.
If you said current instead of past tense and the judge says, well, how could that be right? It's happened. So it's very important that it's done properly. And the process is straightforward. Don't choose somebody just because they speak Arabic or they come from your village. You wouldn't go to somebody to get your children treated if they were ill just because they came from some. Rather, are they competent to the job? And in my experience, most of the lawyers that do this work are competent. You don't get many reward points for being an immigration lawyer these days. It's fact. You may have heard there was a police incident at one firm in London somewhere where somebody went in there and apparently to attack an immigration lawyer after the speeches that have been made against lawyers, lefty lawyers or what have you. So they should choose carefully and make sure that they explain their case fully. And to be honest with you, I think majority of the people, the overwhelming majority of lawyers are very good and dedicated to what they do. You get bad apples in every barrel, and I'm not going to criticize people for that, but yeah, it's something which you should choose carefully.
بدي أشكر السيد بشارات علي على الأسئلة اللي طرحناها عليه. ممكن نعمل مقابلات دورية مع المركز، ممكن نستضيفه مباشرة على الهواء. إذا عندكم أي استفسارات اتركوا التعليق على هذا الفيديو، وإن شاء الله حنحاول نجيب على التساؤلات. سيد بشارات، شكرا جزيلا.
عفوا، مرحبا بكم، شكرا.